try to get started. So, has anybody done any winter sowing before? No. Okay. So I've been doing it for a couple years. I tried a few different things. I tried putting seeds in the refrigerator to simulate the cold period for the seeds to help them germinate. And then I started doing it outside and found that was like a lot easier. You kind of put it outside and you just leave it there for the winter and check on it in the spring once it starts warming up and hopefully your seeds are sprouting in the container. But I usually prepare the container first, like when the weather is nicer, and then plant the seeds once it cools down at night. There's a lot of different container options. A lot of people use these milk jugs because they're like stable and easy to do. And you just cut a little bit higher than halfway around the container. And then use, some people use like something hot to melt little holes in the bottom for drainage, but you can also use scissors and put like holes on the bottom like 1.5 to 2 inches apart so there's enough drainage from the rain and the snow melting. And then you also put some holes in the top for ventilation, and you cut it a little higher than halfway around the top and leave a small part connected. Like I brought an example like this so you can lift the top open. Sometimes it's easier to cut it and then put the holes in so you have a better grip on the container. And then you want about 3 or 4 inches of soil in the bottom of the container so that it's able to hold a little bit of warmth and moisture throughout the season, the winter season. And then you put your seeds on top according to the instructions on the seed packet. So some seeds need light, so you would just lay them on top of the soil and sprinkle a little soil on top, or a little vermiculite, or whatever your preference is. And other seeds would need to be buried under the soil. It's usually, if you look at the size of the seed, that's sort of an indicator of how deep it should be. The smaller it should be, the closer to the top of the soil. And then you seal it up with some tape around the side so that you're keeping as much of the moisture in as you can, but the top you can leave open, and you just set it outside for the winter on the ground. And I usually put it in a sunny place, and that's pretty much it. Make sure it gets some moisture. If you have a long dry period, you might want to put some water in, or if it snows, put a little snow, tuck a little snow in the container.
Where are you putting these?
I put them on the ground outside.
Right down.
Yep, right outside in the cold. When you're planting native seeds, they usually need at least 30 days of cold period before they'll germinate. Some need a much longer, but some need a couple seasons. You have to read on the seed packets or research about the seeds.
When is a good time to start, and is each seed different when you would start it?
It's good to look at the germination period to get an idea about how far ahead you should start, but generally they recommend after the winter solstice to do it. I did mine a little bit early. This year I did it around Thanksgiving because I saw that we were having a cold period coming up. But generally, I think people do it around Christmas, New Year's.
So this would be like the cold stratification, is that what
Yes.
it's called? Instead of doing it in the fridge for however many weeks.
Exactly.
So it's safe.
Yep. Yeah, you just let nature do its job outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the difference in having it there or having it like just planted in the ground? Or they
So this does offer some protection from like groundhogs or animals that are foraging in the winter time. I know I have possums in my backyards that like to dig up all back there, and the birds and the squirrels. So I guess in the spring it protects for a little while from slugs and things like that. So you'll just have a higher germination rate in the container. You can plant seeds on the ground in the fall. That's a great way to grow too, and probably the stronger ones will survive that way.
Are you looking for a sunny area? Where do you put yours?
I put mine in a sunny area. Yeah, it might depend on the type of seeds that you're planting. Like if you were doing like a shade-loving type plant, then it might be better to keep that in a less sunny location or fewer hours of sun per day. And then one other tip I have is for the labels. I generally use acrylic pens that to help them last through all the cold and the wet and the sun, so they don't fade by spring, because you don't want to like come out to your container in the spring and then be like, what did I plant in there? That's happened to me before.
How many seeds should you start in one? Like if you're using a jug? How many? What was the spacing? How many would you put in there?
It depends it probably depends on what your plan is for how much you want to plant. Like I have a small yard, so I'll probably put like a couple different types of flowers in one jug. But if you have a lot of space that you're trying to fill in, or one plant that you're in love with, then you can just put one type of seed in a container.
So you can mix the different types in one.
You can, yeah.
I guess with transplanting, would you just transplant it then once you see them?
Okay, sure, yeah. So
How long
what
do
they
you wait?
recommend is when you have true sets of leaves, then they're ready to transplant. And they recommend planting in bunches so that you're not exposing the roots when you do the transplant, to help them have a better chance of succeeding.
So not pulling them apart into little.
Yeah, right. Exposing the root, I guess, makes them more vulnerable.
What time of the year do you think it's safest to put it in the ground? Are you transplanting to a different
So
different pot, or before you go to the ground to make sure it's a little more established?
So that also depends on what you're planting. For native seeds, they take a lot of time growing roots the first year, so you could honestly leave them in the jugs until the fall. But you would want to make sure they're getting enough ventilation and not drying out. Once it warms up, you have to pay more attention to those variables. But you can plant them in the ground in the spring. Or what I'm probably going to plan to do this year is put like maybe half in the ground and pot up half of them, just to see what works better. It's sort of trial and error for your environment and where you're planting and the critters you have around.
Would you leave your lid like open for the summer then, so it's not too?
Yeah, I wouldn't cover it up in the summer at all, because it'll cook in there. These are like little greenhouses basically. Yeah, and in the early spring when it starts warming up during the day but it's still cold at night, I'll open them during the day and cover them back up at night. All right, so we want to do some hands-on stuff. So in the spring, when it starts to warm up, you want to open up your little greenhouses and make sure they don't get too hot or too dry in there. Make sure check them weekly. Make sure the soil's moist. And once the plants have 2 sets of real leaves, that's when you can go ahead and either take them out and plant them in your garden, or you can leave them in your winter sowing containers over the summer and plant them in the fall. Just make sure you're checking them on a regular basis to make sure that they stay moist and not too hot. And if you find yourself with some extra plants, please donate them to the Green Wagons. We're always looking for native plant donations.